In this video, we've got the same job order cost scenario as my video from part 1 of exercise 215, but this time our assumption for applying overhead is we're going to use a departmental rate versus that one plant-wide overhead rate. So we're actually going to be applying overhead more accurately using the departmental rate. So let me go ahead and start to clear a path so we have a little bit of room. We're going to start with A, where we go ahead and calculate those individual departmental predetermined overhead rates. And again, this time it's not one plant ride. We're going to have to do it separately. They've got two different departments, so we're going to have to do that calculation similar to what we did for plant wide, but separately for molding and fabrication. So I'm going to start to do these calculations. I'm just pulling the estimated information that we have listed up here. For example, we have estimated hours for molding of 27,000, estimated hours for fabrication, machine hours of 37,000. Individually multiplying those times the estimated variable manufacturing overhead rate per machine hour. Coincidentally, if you listen to the first video, coincidentally here it happens to be 5.4 for each. Don't assume that that's going to be the case for your exam questions or extra credit. Individually multiplying 27,000 estimated hours for molding times 5.4 is an estimated variable manufacturing overhead cost of molding of 145,800. Estimated hours of machine hours for fabrication, 37,000, times an estimated rate of 5.4 is total estimated variable manufacturing overhead cost for fabrication of 199,800. Now at this point you may say, hey, wait a second, this looks very similar if you did the other video to what we did for plant wide, and at that point we just added these together and lumped it in with total fixed cost. Here's where things are going to diverge. We're going to keep these separately between molding and fabrication. To that total variable manufacturing overhead cost for molding, we're going to add fixed manufacturing overhead costs for molding of $770,000 to get total manufacturing overhead costs for molding of $915,800. Going over to fabrication, again, our individual variable manufacturing overhead estimated cost was $199,800. Add to that our total estimated fixed manufacturing overhead cost of $230,000, and we get total estimated manufacturing overhead cost for fabrication of $429,800. So we're separating out these individual buckets. Then we'll individually divide that by the estimated hours. Molding, 915,800 estimated cost divided by 27,000 estimated machine hours gives us a predetermined overhead rate for molding of $33.92. Fabrication, total estimated manufacturing overhead cost of $429,800 divided by total estimated machine hours of 37,000 gives us a departmental predetermined overhead rate for fabrication 1162. So if you remember from the first video, the plant wide was around, I believe it was 2103. So these are very different individually. We have a lot, molding's consuming a lot more overhead than fabrication. So obviously we're going to be applying overhead a lot more accurately in this scenario. Now let's go ahead, we're not finished yet. Let's go ahead and move on to part B. I'm clearing a path here just because fairly intense calculations. I don't want to clutter it too much. And very similar to what I did on the first video, we're calculating manufacturing costs assigned to these individual jobs. I'm just going to do it for job D70. You'll get the gist and you can do it yourself for job C200. So I've got, and again, individually, I'm going to list for molding and fabrication, direct materials for molding of $375,000, fabrication of $324,000. Again, this is the actual cost of direct materials that we apply. Direct labor, just getting the information from here, actual cost $240,000 for molding, $160,000 for fabrication. But according to the normal costing system, we need to apply our manufacturing overhead based on our individual predetermined overhead rates that we just calculated. So I'm just pulling those from part A, $33.92 for molding, $11.62 for fabrication. Very similar to what we did with a plant-wide rate, we take the predetermined rate times the actual number of hours for the individual job. So for molding, 3392 times 22,000 actual hours gives us manufacturing overhead applied to molding of 746,240. Similar for fabrication, but a different rate, 1162 times actual fabrication hours of 5,000 gives us overhead we're going to apply to fabrication of 58,100. Now, we need to add up all three different categories of manufacturing costs: actual direct material, actual direct labor, and the overhead we're going to apply. So for example, for molding, it's 375,000 plus 240,000 plus applied overhead of 746,240 gives us total manufacturing costs for just the molding department of 1,361,240. Similar for fabrication, we'll get total manufacturing cost for fabrication for this particular job of 542,100. Now finally, we kept isolating them because they had completely different overhead rates. Now we're going to throw them both together and add our molding of 1,361,240, manufacturing costs, fabrication of 542,100. We just individually calculated to get for part number B. Total job cost of D70 is going to be 1,903,340. So we just have to keep them separate until we get to the last point. For C, very similar to how I did for the plant-wide situation, our bid price policy is still 150% of our total manufacturing costs. So I'm going to take the total manufacturing cost for job D70, 1,903,340 times 150%, and that's going to give us the bid price, or what we're attempting to charge to our customers for job D70, of $2,855,010. Again, similar to the first video, I'm not going to do this also for C200 because you get the overall process and you can go ahead and follow along with that. One point I'll make, just in case you didn't watch the first video, is I talked about being careful about these price policies. Here it's listed as a percentage of total manufacturing costs. If it had been listed as a markup percentage, for example, if it said they charge a 35% markup, we would have taken the 35% times the job cost of 1,903,340, added that's just the point above the cost, added that back to the manufacturing costs to get a total sales price. Also, I'll make a quick point just in case you didn't watch the first video. For part number D, when it asks you about total cost of goods sold in this particular situation, all I have to do is add the total manufacturing cost for both jobs, D70 and C200, once you get those calculations. Because the scenario is not necessarily a real world scenario, but we try to make it easy in this chapter that they have no beginning and ending inventory. Since I don't start with inventory and I don't end with inventory, any manufacturing costs that I incur for these two individual jobs is what I'm actually going to sell. So when I add those together, I end up with cost of goods sold.